Today we are talking about an important topic and one that has some urgency to it. We're talking about website accessibility. Did you know that your website must be accessible by everyone? Just like brick and mortar businesses need to follow the Americans with Disabilities Act, websites must also be barrier-free. Now, the urgency behind this topic comes because many businesses are finding themselves under fire, targeted by lawsuits. Joining me today to talk about this are two of my colleagues here, fellow entrepreneurs. We have Ash Harris of AKEA Web Solutions and Paul Schmidt of UnoDeuce Multimedia. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. Let's have you introduce yourselves. Paul, let's start with you.
Well, I'm Paul Schmidt. I'm the owner and creative video strategist for UnoDeuce Multimedia.
And I'm Ash Harris with AKEA Web Solutions. I'm the CEO. And yeah, we design and develop accessible websites.
Guys, thanks so much to both of you for joining us today. The three of us are colleagues through a group called Second Brain Collective. We are a collection of small businesses, all marketing and business development related, and we work as kind of a non-agency approach. So Paul, Ash, and I often team up on projects together, like web accessibility, which is our topic today. Ash, I'm going to kick things off with you right away because you lead a team that focuses on building websites that are accessible, and you work with organizations of all sizes on auditing and then overhauling websites for accessibility purposes. So first, for our audience, let's explain, what does it mean, Ash, to have an accessible website?
So an accessible website is a website that is barrier-free, okay? So for all users. And a website that is accessible follows standards. Now, if you think about a brick and mortar business location, there are no barricades in front of the door to prevent people from coming in, or that would allow people who can walk to be the only ones who can get through the door. If someone was in a wheelchair, there's easy access. There are ramps in a building or in a commercial space. There are railings and restrooms, and doorways have to be a particular width to allow easy access. So those are examples of physical accessibility standards. In terms of digital accessibility, what that means is that there are the same kinds of standards for digital spaces. And the reason for this is that when a website or a digital environment follows these standards, the technology that people who require the use of, let's say, a screen reader, when they're using a screen reader, when these standards are followed, the screen reader is able to help that person. And if, let's suppose they are blind and the screen reader is reading the content of a website to them, they're able to successfully navigate and consume the content that's on that page, in that digital environment.
Okay, let's talk about the screen readers for a moment. Let's kind of pause here, Ash. I'm going to pull up a website. Actually, I'll pull up your website. Okay. And let's kind of talk through, like, what does a screen reader do? What does it see as it looks at a website? So let me pull this up here and let's take a look at this. Okay, so there's AKEAweb.com. Ash, when you talk about a screen reader, because we talk about this all the time, so we know and we understand how a screen reader reads a page. Can you kind of talk us through, as an example? I mean, obviously you're not a screen reader, but can you talk us through, as an example, how a screen reader might approach reading this page?
So a screen reader is going to read a website from the top to the bottom. And there are cues that you place in your website, such as skip nav. Now, if you hit your tab or the Apple equivalent, whatever you have on your Mac there, there'll be a little button that pops up. At any rate, there's a little menu that pops up that is called skip nav. And what that does is that helps someone who is maybe several pages deep in your website, that takes them down to the main content on the site, so they don't have to listen to the entire menu, because a screen reader will actually, again, start at the very top of your page and read through it, including items such as the menu at the top of the page. So it's important to have that, because people who are navigating don't necessarily need to read the whole menu or have the whole menu read to them on every page that they click on. There are issues, so a screen reader helps them understand where they are within the page. Another element is, like titles on your page or headings. So at the top of this page, it says learn more about web accessibility standards. And so that is what's called a heading 1. A heading 1 is supposed to be it's the very first bit of content at the very top of your page, after the menu, after the header. And every other heading down there, where it says, say, get familiar with ADA law, etc., that is an H2. And so it's important to follow those things so that when someone is tabbing through, and they're not able to see the website, but they're listening to the website being read to them. And so they can skip from link to link, they can skip from heading to heading, and kind of drill down to the bit of content. So they're actually scanning a website audibly the way other people might scan it visually.
That's great. Thank you for kind of talking us through that, Ash, because as we start to talk about tips and structure for how people start to, at least kind of at home in what little ways that they can, or in the office, start to make sure that their websites are accessible. This helps us to understand what we're actually talking about here, how how those screen readers are working. So Ash, this might be a really basic question, but I know that you get asked it a lot by clients, especially as they're looking at spending the time and the resources and investing in making a website that's accessible. Why is it important that we allow all users to access our websites? Sometimes we hear maybe someone has a really niche market that they feel like, oh, maybe I don't need accessibility. Why is it important, Ash?
Well, you've touched on a lot of different topics there in that basic question, Julie. So essentially, I think what it comes down to is, just like in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, we saw businesses being urged, encouraged, and in some cases they got in trouble for not addressing physical accessibility issues in their physical spaces, places of business. And so that has all come to fruition. Any place out there, and you do still see issues, and we've seen this in even public services, in education settings and in government buildings, where there are issues with accessibility. And I'm not sure why they're there, but they shouldn't be. With technology, as the internet has been evolving for the past several decades, really picking up steam in the 90s, and certainly in the last 20 years, these standards have evolved that when businesses follow these standards on their websites, it allows all users access. And so at this point in time, with how technology, whether it's hardware or software or certainly the internet has matured and developed, because these standards are there and because there are solutions for people with disabilities to be able to have access, it's pretty important to allow them access. There's no reason not to.
Absolutely. And Ash, to kind of throw in this personal example here. So one of your ambassadors, someone that I've had the chance to meet, she's an Olympian, and she has visual impairments, and just an incredible woman to talk to. And she explained it to me in this way, that, let's say she needs to buy a pair of shoes. She needs a new pair of running shoes. Because she does. She runs, right. She trains with her dog, and she's this amazing athlete. She's an Olympian in Canada. Yep. So let's say she needs to buy a pair of running shoes. It should be easier for her to not have to leave her home, given all of our abilities now to go online and buy a pair of shoes online without ever having to leave our homes. But because of so many websites that are not accessible, it can actually be so frustrating. It can be much easier for her to have to leave her house and make her way, take a bus with her dog, cross busy streets in a big city to go shopping in a physical location than it can be to navigate a website. So, and I found that really kind of, mind-boggling to me, that, wow, okay, in this day and age, it's harder for someone like Jessica, depending on where she's going online to buy shoes, for example. It would be harder for her to do it online than to actually venture out and have to do it. So that's what you're describing.
Well, and I guess I would, you raise a good point there too. And I think that another factor to consider is, as the internet has matured, what that means is that there are so many business functions, so many daily activities that are reliant on the internet at this point. And there are certain business functions that can only be done online. So if you are telling all of your customers that the only way to, say, contact customer service or to pay a bill or buy a pair of shoes, well, you have to use our website. What you're doing is essential. It's the equivalent of putting up a physical barricade in front of your place of business that prevents anybody from getting in, or simply, in the worst case, intentionally targeting people with disabilities, saying, nope, you can't access this space. And so because of everyone's reliance, whether it's just for convenience or because of critical daily functions, your website does need to accommodate all users.
Wow, such a good point. And let's not forget the fact that right now, I think as of the last US Census, there were 56 million Americans living with a disability. And so if you are, in the world, okay, so it is.
No, tens of millions, yes, in the United States.
So now, and if you are in effect putting up those barriers, even if you're not intending to, you're not only keeping them from reaching your business, but you're also keeping your business from reaching these potential clients and these customers who it'd be great to build these relationships with. And Paul, I'm not ignoring you. I want to get to you in just a moment to talk about video and accessibility, because I know you have some tips for us on that. But Ash, first, and maybe video ties into this, can you talk to us about what are some of the typical problems that you see when you audit a website? What are some things that your clients may not even realize are problematic when it comes to accessibility?
Sure. Well, we do have a web page that talks about some of the most common issues on our website, but I can rattle off a few for you right now. Some of the things that I've mentioned, the ability to skip the navigation, that's the very first thing I look for on any website to ensure that that's there. If that's not there, that means nothing else has been attended to. Issues such as the logical flow, which means drilling down in your content with the proper header order, or like you don't want to jump from a main heading 1 down to a heading 5. Now, a lot of people do that because it's easier to format the content or faster to format the content in some cases. But you don't want to do that. Other issues would deal, let's say someone is not blind, but they have color blindness. And so you want to pay attention to things like color contrast. So you always want to avoid, even though designers love it, and I even did way back when the internet was first born, well, in modern era, putting medium gray or even dark gray text on a light gray background, no good. That just completely blurs or is completely unreadable for people with color blindness. So yeah, and then also navigating labeling your links properly on your website is also a big thing too. Having animations on websites is not necessarily a helpful thing. A lot of people like to do it, even though people love the parallax backgrounds where the text moves faster or slower than the background scrolls. That can be disorienting for people with certain disabilities. One other item is, what was I going to say? Oh, so we talk a lot about alt text for images. If you have images on your web, and in conjunction with that, putting text on your website, but it's not actual text, it's part of a picture. You can do that, it's just not advisable. There's a proper way to do it, but it's really frowned on altogether. If you have an image or a photo with text in it that is part of the content and the message of the page, it really needs to be, there needs to be alternative text or alt text provided for that. Or if there's an image that provides meaning to a page, such as, a bank president, a picture of a bank president is on the bank's website, there should be an appropriate alternative text that describes this is the president of XYZ Bank.
Okay, so let's talk about alt text there for a minute, alternative text. So I'm going to throw up a picture here for us to take a look at. And this is, a picture of our group actually that we sponsor every month. It's called the Drinking Lunch in Lansing. This is a picture from last month's or a couple months ago, one of our events. Yes. So this is a picture from that event, and let's just talk through what alt text mean. I mean, it seems that, as you kind of decode the English language there, that it's alternative text. So it's a way to describe the photo. But Ash, why don't you talk us through this photo, for example, because alt text, and we'll talk about this a little later, but some platforms will help to generate some alt text. It may not be accurate. It may not be as descriptive as it needs to be, but some platforms are moving that way to help. But I know when you work on websites for your clients, oftentimes you're generating that alt text. So you're deciding what to put in there for that. So talk us through this image. If this was an image that we were including on a website or on social media, what would be the right way to describe this for alt text purposes?
Okay, so one of the hard parts about web accessibility is that it's very contextual. There's a lot of nuances. So this image on 10 different websites may have 10 different completely different descriptions, okay? So on our website, for the drinking lunch, if this image was on the drinking lunch website, we might have alt text for this photo that says, the July 2019 drinking lunch event, okay, or a picture of the crowd at the July 19th event. If this is a photo that is on a website that is, let's just say about business networking in general, and this was a photo that was, kind of in the body of, say, a blog post or something. This image may not actually lend any value or meaning to the page, and so you might use an alt text of simply null. That's N-U-L-L, null. And in that case, what would happen is, as a user was, specifically someone with a screen reader, was navigating through the page, when the focus landed on this image, it would read out null, or actually it would just skip right over it, and so it wouldn't disrupt their flow of hearing the content on the page. And in the case where there was alt text provided, it would, when it landed on the image, it would say image, and then read the description of the image to the user.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is the context really matters then, whether you put in the alt text or not, and then what that alt text would actually say depends on what you need that screen reader to actually be saying.
Absolutely. Yep, accessibility is very nuanced, way beyond just the alt text for images, so yes.
So interesting and so complicated. This is why we need you to help us with this. Okay, so I want to shift gears for just a moment and talk about video. Because Paul, you obviously you own a video company, a video production company. So let's talk about video accessibility. We need to make sure that videos are usable for those who have visual impairment. So what are some of the ways that we can do this, Paul?
For visual impairments, or is that what you're asking specifically?
Yes.
It's interesting for visual impairments because this is something we came across earlier this year, and there's a couple of different ways that you can deal with video when it comes to visual impairments. Number one is to have something called audio descriptions, and what that means is that when somebody isn't talking, you have, like, if there's an interview and they're not talking, you need another voice that describes what the video is doing, what kind of actions are being made, describing exactly what's happening. So it's like a voice comes in between the interviews to talk about what footage or what is being shown there. Now, audio descriptions aren't new, and so Netflix has all of their movies. Well, I don't want to say movies, but all of their programming has an audio description version of it, as well as there's some audio description examples on YouTube. But that's one way. Another way is to potentially, well, that's the best for visual impairments. That's the best way to really get the video out there so that people can have that type of experience in that regard. So
okay. And now, what are there specific programs we should look for, or how do we go about if if we're trying to? Is this? I mean, it sounds kind of complicated. Is it complicated to invest? Is there an investment involved? How do we go about taking that step to make sure that we're accessible?
Well, that's the thing is, in a lot of cases, it's an extra step. It's almost depending on what you're creating. Like in our style, we do a lot of, documentary style videos. So a lot of it is very interview based, and there's not a lot of pause time between voices. So in that regard, what we have to do is we have to extend the video a little bit so that we can shift the footage and have that descriptor there. Also, you have to record that audio description as well. So that's another extra step. So if you're creating these videos for a multitude of disabilities, sometimes you have to create two different videos. One that's like the normal, I don't want to say normal, but the original cut, and then one that is made for those with visual disabilities.
Okay, so Ash, I want to bring you in as well because I have a quick kind of follow-up question here. Both Paul and Ash, maybe both of you know the answer to this. When we're talking about creating this alternative way for those who may have a visual impairment to then hear what's being shown in the video, Ash, is it enough to? I mean, let me see how to say this. Is it so obviously we could take the step of having those auditory cues added into the video. Would it be enough? Would an alternative to that be to use some sort of alt text to describe through written text what's happening rather than an auditory example? I mean, what's kind of the standard there? What's the protocol?
Right. So in the case where someone has a hearing impairment, so as Paul was talking about, captions or those kinds of those different types of options. It's
well, if I can just jump in real quickly, Ash, before we talk about hearing impairment, staying along the lines of the visual impairments, if you so Paul's describing this method of adding those auditory cues within the video itself, but you were just describing screen readers and how they can read through a screen. Is it an option as well to instead have alt text, that instead of having that auditory way of hearing what's going on in the video, could we also use alt text to have a written description of what's going on? I'm just imagining that there may be people watching who are like, wow, I didn't even think about investing in having these auditory cues. Is it enough? I guess is what I'm asking. Is it enough? Is it an alternative, or is it not quite the right step to take?
Right. I guess I was jumping ahead there. Apologies. But no, in terms of providing, the alternative, options, typically, the described video is a good way to go. In terms of, let me think about it. I mean, I guess that's the thing, is it's also nuanced. It really depends. Is it a feature film? Is it a documentary? Is it, what is going on? What is the nature of the video? What's the context of the video? So it's kind of a hard thing to just say, here's the blanket standard,
Yeah, Paul, what do you tend to do with your clients? Is it? I think Ash is probably dead on right there. That it has to do with what format you're working with. Like you said, if you're working with a longer documentary, then maybe you are investing the time into putting in those auditory cues. But Paul, what is your thought on that?
Well, the biggest thing is video is a separate medium that's supposed to be entertaining. So with that, hearing the same voice read through the transcript of the video is not going to give you the same feeling as hearing the voices of those who are part of the video and understanding the differences. Obviously, there's going to have to be, like I said, there's going to be that voiceover descriptor between interviews or between the actions and so on and so forth. But I think, when you have those different voices, and you know that when you're just, I don't really know how a screen reader works. I'm sorry about that, but I mean, I'm sure that when it reads it, that, oh, you're going to be watching a video, then it gives that person that same feeling that they're being entertained by a new medium, because there are some differential with the voices and so on, and they're not hearing just the same voice that's doing the screen reading
from the screen, right? So yeah, basically, the screen reader would navigate you to the elements and then allow you to interact with the elements. So long as those forms and those properly, then you should be able to successfully do that. But yeah, I agree with you. The screen reader wouldn't, reread, what's going on the video necessarily. That would be a function of the, the video and the additional formats that you've created.
But
it's such a great point, guys. I just want to say, one of the things I had said was, is it enough? And that's probably not the right question to even be asking. I mean, I know there are businesses that ask that because they want to make sure they're compliant, they want to meet the standards, but it's also about what is this entertainment factor, or what is the quality of the service that we are providing, whether that's through video or through pictures or through our emails, through our websites. So asking, and I'm the one who asked it, but asking, is it enough, is not the right question to even be asking, because this is all about the quality of what we're providing for everyone, not just those who have their hearing and their eyesight.
Yeah, and it was an interesting journey to develop that, because I must admit, when we were asked to do this not too long ago for the first time, I didn't know what the person was talking about. I said, well, I had to look it up, and I'm like, oh, and then I realized that this is not something new, and I felt a little embarrassed that I didn't know that this option existed. And I said, well, we can definitely do this, but here are some of the we are creating essentially an additional part of a video. And so they were very understanding, like, well, this is what we need because this is who our audience is. And they didn't want to cut corners on the entertainment factor of saying, well, we can just have a transcript read. That's the cheap way to do it. Just get a transcription of the video and just have the screen reader read that. That's saving you a little bit of money, yes. But to really engage the audience like you would anybody else, this is doing an audio description video is very, very important.
And Ash, at AKEA Web Solutions, I know that you guys talk a lot, your team talks a lot about accessibility is the right thing to do, regardless of what the standards say, regardless of what the laws say. It's just the right thing to do to be accessible. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, that was kind of coming to mind as Paul was talking, and I thought, we can address that, a little bit later on, but I think it fits very well here. Accessibility is the right thing to do, because what it comes down to is, again, whether intentionally or unintentionally, by not providing the accessible options and format, enhancing your, whether it's media or, digital environment with standards, when you don't do that, you're literally putting up a barricade for people who are reliant on or who utilize assistive technologies. And again, whether that's not having a ramp up to your business's door for people using a wheelchair, or providing the right formats for people using a screen reader. You're excluding them, and whether it's intentional or unintentional, you're excluding them.
Absolutely. I mean, especially if you have an online marketplace, an online store, you literally are preventing people from being able to shop in your store. Paul, I want to jump back over to you again, because we had a really interesting conversation, the three of us, before we started recording here. We know that Google likes video. We talked about this in previous Facebook Lives with this group, but Google also likes accessible video even more. Paul, what are some tips for making sure that your video is accessible on Google's search engine?
Well, a lot of it has to do with things you should be doing already. However, I do want to remind folks that you should transcribe your video, but also get captions. Now, I want folks to remember that captions are not the same as subtitles, because captions describe everything as well as what's being said, whereas subtitles only cover what's being said. They don't give you descriptors. They don't give you, they don't give you the descriptors in between voice talking. So, and that right there, the captioning as well as the transcription is very indexable by Google, and so right there you're going to be there. So that is the biggest part of not only just having a video, and Google likes video, but having that search functionality within the captions as well as the transcript. And if you want to take it a step further, you can also, if you don't want to do transcripts, you can have a box in the corner where somebody is doing sign, ASL. And so you can have that as well. That's a little bit more work, but it's also an option. I don't think that will help you in Google, sorry, but I'm just going alongside with what's available for those who are hearing impaired. And yeah, so that's what's really going to help you be Google searchable, because like you said, Google really likes video. And so you just add these little motions in which, like I said, you should be adding closed captioning. You should be trying to transcribe your video in some way, shape, or form, so that you can use that as part of your blog posts, so on, and that you have that available for those who want to use that as in addition or in lieu of watching the video.
And a fun tip as far as closed captioning, and I know we're not the only team that does this, but if you're looking for a quick way to make sure that you're getting as accurate as possible as far as providing a transcript for closed captioning, what we often do is we will upload a video to YouTube first. We'll run it through YouTube's closed captioning, its transcription tool, because we find that it's more accurate than some of the other platforms that are out there. So we will then take the YouTube transcription for closed captioning and we'll use that over on Facebook. And of course, you still have to go in either way and clean it up and make sure it's accurate. I'd given an example last week that we had put together a video on condos, and throughout the whole video, YouTube thought it was talking, or Facebook thought it was talking about pandas, which obviously would have a very different connotation if we had kept that in. So you definitely, no matter what tool you use, you have to go through it and clean it up. Ash, do you have anything to add about, we spent a lot of time talking about visual impairments and how to work with screen readers, but anything as far as auditory or, hearing impairments that we should know about when it comes to accessibility and website accessibility?
Well, we could talk all day about many different aspects of web accessibility. It's, as I said, there are many, perspectives and many different ways to, or many different things to consider when you are working to make your digital environment accessible. So I think what we've done here is we've provided a little bit of an overview.
Absolutely. And I want to talk just briefly about social media. So closed captioning is so important on social media as well. And it's one thing that as marketers, we often, and business owners, entrepreneurs, we often don't necessarily think about on social media. While closed captioning, as we've talked about, essentially captures the audio we hear and translates it into text on the screen, we also need to do the reverse and take the images we see and create the text that can then be read by a screen reader for those who have visual impairments. Finally, in the last year, we saw Instagram make efforts to make its platform accessible. So it now allows us as users to add alt text to our images so that we can be descriptive about what the images show. It's a lot easier than it sounds. You just write about what you see in the image. Ash described that earlier for us. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and now Instagram all have this feature. The interesting thing about Instagram is they will they have their own algorithm to automatically generate that alt text for you. But again, you want to make sure it's descriptive, and that, I mean, sometimes it can say, you know, a girl, which doesn't necessarily describe what's happening in the picture. So you definitely need to take a look at those alt tags and make sure that they're accurate and that they're descriptive enough. Another social media tip for you in order to be more accessible: write your hashtags in camel case. This is the upper and lower text where you capitalize the beginning of each word. Otherwise, it can be very difficult for a screen reader to decipher that, you know, all that text squished together, all lowercase or all uppercase. So make sure and use that, that camel case. Also, use emojis sparingly. A screen reader is set up to automatically read emojis out loud. So on one hand, one smiley face is not bad, but hearing it repeated 10 times in a row takes time and it grows old. So just a couple social media tips for you there. So Ash, I want to come back over to you again. And, you know, we mentioned in the very beginning some of the urgency about this topic of web accessibility. And this is not to scare anyone. We're not creating any, you know, we're not sounding any alarm bells or creating panic. But I do want to talk about the reality of making sure that we as business owners are complying with this accessibility standards. So can you talk a little bit about that? Are there industries that seem to be more at risk right now? Are there industries that are being targeted for compliance with web accessibility?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of legal action around this, and it's been growing exponentially the last several years. Last year, there were over 2,000 cases, and we're already pretty much at that number this year. So basically, what's happening is there's two types of well, I guess let's talk about the industries. You know, the people who, I guess, the institutions and the businesses that find themselves at you know, at most risk, and there's a lot of publicity around this: financial institutions, higher education, public education. A couple of years ago, there was a person who actually in the state of Michigan was systematically filing complaints and lawsuits. A lot, hundreds and hundreds, I forget the total number, of public schools here in Michigan. And so, yeah, I mean, so anything from government, healthcare, insurance, you know, financial. So these are major verticals that are experiencing this right now, but also we have a lot of activity on this front in e-commerce. But then also this affects any business. I mean, we're talking about small mom and pop restaurants. We're talking about, you know, in New York State, there were like 18 wineries that were sued over web accessibility complaints. There have been groups of freelance photographers targeted. There have been art galleries targeted. So no one's immune from liability over this or being able to be called out. The interesting thing about how this works is that if you do receive, there's two things that can happen. Three things, I suppose. You might get a casual inquiry to say, hey, your website is not allowing me to access it, and I'm using a screen reader. Would you please help me, or would you please fix it? If that goes unaddressed, that can escalate to an official letter of complaint. And when that happens, you know, institutions like the Office of Civil Rights, the Department of Justice can get involved. And when that happens, you know, you really have to, you're given mandates at that point to get on the ball and, you know, find all of the issues, perform an audit, and then, you know, you're given a timeline to fix those things. Okay. In the case of a lawsuit, when it gets to that point, the timelines for fixing things are really not generous, and it creates a lot of just a lot of stir. And there are legal expenses incurred. There's emergency technical work and consulting, and so the longer you wait, the more expensive it will become. I had a family farm contact me a month ago, and they have a little family farm store, and they have a pretty big operation, but their store is not huge. It's popular in the region that they're in, but they were contacted by a law firm in the state of California, and they received a pretty nasty letter, and they were pretty panicked. So, at any rate, I guess all that to say, this is a concern for everybody. Just like, again, back in the 90s, I'm old enough to remember when this all happened. I knew business owners who complained about it, but really, when you look at it, we're all living in a society here together, and we're all trying to provide value for each other. And so, again, this isn't about this just being the thing you have to do legally, or doing the bare minimum not to get sued. It's about, serving the people in the country we live in and in the world we live in. There's no reason to very actively exclude any user. So this is just something that everybody should be proactive about. And you'll be very happy that you were proactive if you choose to go that route.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that a little bit, and we're gonna get to questions next. Let me just ask one more question here of you, Ash. You mentioned being proactive. What are some steps that we can take to make sure that before we get that letter, before we get to that, that first warning stage, what can we do right now to make sure that we are making our websites accessible?
Well, that's a tricky question. I mean, you have to do, just understand that, 80 to 90% of the websites out there, and this includes government and higher education and every institution, 80 to 90% of the websites out there are not accessible or not compliant. They may be accessible.
I know what we need to do. We need to call you. And I laugh, but in all seriousness, I think it's really important for all of us. I myself am a business owner. Paul, you're a business owner. We work with accessibility options for our clients, but we are not the go-to accessibility experts when it comes to, from start to finish, building a website that's accessible. Ash, that is what you and your team do. And so, so I'll answer for you. I think the first step to take is to have an audit done, right? Can you tell me, what does an audit do?
I agree. So basically, the very first thing you can do is, find a web accessibility company and, create a relationship with them. What happens when someone is approached with a complaint or a lawsuit, if a company already has an existing relationship and a contract with a company to address web accessibility issues, they're treated, I don't want to say graciously, but the system, is very appreciative of that, and they're treated much more. They're given more generous timelines to finish, and to address the issues. So you could say that this kind of halts the legal process. They're just given, maybe rather than 6 months or 12 months to fix everything, they're given, a couple of years, 2-3 years maybe, to actually completely resolve issues on their in their environment. So the very best thing you can do, as you said, Julie, is to find a company and get an audit done. And what an audit is essentially there is software that you can run on your website, and what the software does is it scans your website, and it'll find about 30%, on a really good day, maybe up to 40% of the issues out on your website. And our best recommendation, if you really want to be thorough and find all of the issues, and really make sure that you're taking all the right steps and covering yourself, work with a company like ours that will also perform a manual review. These reviews are performed by users on our user tester team. These are users with disabilities of various types, whether it's hearing impairments, vision impairments, mobility impairments, and even cognitive impairments. So what we will do at that point is catalog all of the issues that the software finds, and also on top of that, perform a complete manual review. And this includes your website, your pages, forms, e-commerce functions, but also elements, certainly video and media, but also digital documents. such as PDFs or Word documents, etc. So so then what we will do is we will compile all of these into a thorough report and annotate that and be able to present that to you and begin to talk about the plan to fix the issues that are on your website.
So perfect. So I dove right in because Ash, that answers our very first question from Melissa and Joshua Genther on what's the best way to ensure you are taking the right steps to make sure your website is accessible. And so I think Melissa and Joshua, it sounds like the answer there is, you start first with an audit. And Ash, I think it's important to say, I know you don't like to toot your own horn here, so I will do it. I think it's important to point out that there are companies out there, just like any type of industry, there are companies out there that will say that they build accessible websites, but you really need to do your research. Just like with any purchase you make, you want to make sure you're hiring someone that really is an expert and really knows what they're doing, because as Ash has given us just a tiny, tiny little taste today, it is very complicated. And so we want, and really at the end of the day, we want to be doing the right thing. So make sure that you are doing your research and finding a company that knows what they're doing. So we're going to open it up now to any other questions that our viewers might have. One thing that I get asked a lot is, or actually I don't even get asked a lot, but I bring it up a lot because I find that so many of our clients are not doing this correctly, and that's email marketing. Our emails must be accessible as well. And so if you are using a third-party platform like MailChimp or Constant Contact or iContact, any of those third-party platforms, there are tools built in for things like alt tags, for things like headers, for subject lines, to make sure that our emails are accessible. But if you aren't using them, then your emails could be a hindrance. So for example, one example would be, and I see this quite often, is you might make this beautiful flyer. You've got images in it, kind of like what Ash was describing earlier. You've got text with the images. You make this beautiful flyer in Photoshop. And then you go into MailChimp and you don't write any text. You just insert this image into MailChimp and fire it off and send it. Well, if you're getting a user on the other end who has a visual impairment, that email is arriving with absolutely nothing except what would be like a blank image. And so you need to be making use of the alt text. And even more important than that alt text is making sure that you're using text appropriately within the email. Just like Ash described for your website, you need to be making use of the text boxes and making use of the H1 headers and H2 headers and all of that coding that then signals to the screen reader how to actually be reading this email. So email marketing is something that is often overlooked by clients because we get so used to thinking we know who we're sending it to. But especially if you're sending to a large list, you need to make sure, guys, that that you're sending it with the appropriate alt tags and descriptions. So any other questions out there, guys, or any questions, Paul or Ash, that you often get asked that now is the time? Anything else you want to add here?
Well, I want to go back to the captioning aspect of it. And how you said that, well, we use YouTube and Facebook, and yeah, those are free options that you should utilize. However, if you're doing more, if you're transcribing, if you are doing the captions as well, using a company we like to use is rev.com, and rev.com really does provide a lot for $1 a minute. The $1 a minute refers to how long the video is. And so it's amazing what they can, and you can go in and edit it. You can
super fast too.
Yeah, they are very fast at what they do, and they get it to you really a lot better. They do a lot better job than Facebook right off the bat. Probably because it's somebody that's doing it for you. But yeah, it's a very cost-effective way, and you can get multiple files from that. So if you want to just subtitle one, you can make a subtitle file off it. If you need closed captioning, you can get the closed captioning. I mean, it's just amazing what they do for the cost that they have. However, you can still use YouTube and Facebook because they do transcribe them that way. And yeah, and the other aspect when it comes to the development of video for those with impairments is make sure that if you do have text in your video that is readable. I mean, I understand if you're trying to be creative and fancy and so on, but people need to read it. It's got to be up there for for a certain amount of time for them to be able to read it. And you know, using some bold colors is good. Like using some bold graphical colors is good as well. And be careful about stroby flashy things too, because that sometimes triggers different people's disabilities or what they have. And so there's a tool out there. I think it's called PEAT, but PEAT, that will help you determine if your video has any of those overly stroby flashy elements to it, and that way you can go in and fix it, because you don't want to trigger somebody's illness or disability when you're just trying to be creative. Great point. Thanks, Paul. Ash, any final thoughts?
No, I think this was a really good session. I would encourage people to be proactive because this isn't going to go away. It's just going to continue to grow and evolve and develop as time goes on. And you have to remember too, I was speaking with a firm yesterday that is very interested in getting on this. They've got a pretty tight deadline, a self-imposed deadline, because they want to make sure that they're serving all users. And while potential for legal action is, it's a real concern. They want to do this for the right reasons. They want to actually serve all of their customers and potential customers. So I would encourage people to approach this with the right spirit and really work to, incorporate this into your institution. Anybody who touches your website, anybody who contributes content or publishes content, you can react to this from either a panicked perspective or from a perspective of let's do the right thing, and that's what we encourage. And we want to walk with you through that process to help you institutionalize policies, that will go throughout your organization, so that you can adopt this and be proactive, not just get compliant, but become sustainable in this effort. That's our heart as a company. And this is personal for us. The people on our team have had disabilities that have affected, their ability to type or, even operate a mouse or hear or see. And so this is near and dear to us and our hearts. And we encourage you to, again, approach this from the right perspective. And I encourage all of our viewers today, check out AKEAweb.com to learn more about website accessibility. There are a lot of resources on this website, a lot of blogs, a lot of information. There is a guide on what an audit will include. So all of these things that we've talked about today, you can find more at AKEAweb.com. Ash Harris, thank you so much for joining us. And Paul Schmidt, thank you to you as well. Paul Schmidt, owner of UnoDeuce Multimedia, UnoDeuce.com. You can learn more there. So thanks to you both for joining us, and thank you at home. I really hope that you got as much out of this today as we did, as I did, even hearing from these experts. So thank you so much for joining us. We will see you back here again next month.